My name is Edwin Reece, and I've been a senior DevOps engineer at CloudSync Technologies here in Austin for 4 years. Our startup had grown from 12 people in a cramped office to over 200 employees across 3 floors of a sleek building in the domain. I'd built most of our infrastructure from the ground up, and I was proud of what we'd accomplished. That pride took its first hit the day Brad Williams walked through our doors. Brad was everything I wasn't: tall, loud, confident in that particular way that makes boardrooms nod and engineers cringe. He had an MBA from UT, a firm handshake, and a vocabulary full of words like synergize and optimize workflows. Our CEO, Serena Martinez, introduced him at the all-hands meeting as our new director of IT operations. Brad brings 15 years of enterprise experience, Serena announced. He's here to help us scale our operations for the next phase of growth. I watched from the back of the room as Brad flashed his practice smile and talked about bringing structure to organic processes. The phrase made my stomach turn. Our processes weren't organic. They were carefully designed, tested, and proven. Every security protocol, every deployment pipeline, every monitoring system had been built with purpose. After the meeting, Brad made his rounds, introducing himself to the engineering teams. When he got to my workstation, his handshake lingered a beat too long. "Edwin, right? I've heard you're the go-to guy for infrastructure." His tone was friendly enough, but something in his eyes felt calculating. Looking forward to working together. I should have trusted that first instinct. Within 2 weeks, the warning signs were everywhere. Brad scheduled one-on-ones with every member of the DevOps team, everyone except me. He started attending our daily stand-ups uninvited, asking questions that showed he fundamentally misunderstood how our systems worked. "Why do we need separate staging and production environments?" he asked during one stand-up. "Seems like unnecessary overhead." The room fell silent. Our staging environment had caught dozens of critical bugs before they could reach production. It was DevOps 101. Risk mitigation, I explained calmly. We test everything in staging first. It saved us from at least 3 major outages this quarter. Brad nodded like he was considering this, but his smile had that patronizing edge. "I appreciate the conservative approach, but we need to think about velocity. Speed to market." After the meeting, my teammate Jake pulled me aside. "Dude, what's his deal? He acts like he invented cloud computing, but half his questions sound like he's never used AWS." I kept my voice low. "Let's just focus on our work. He'll figure it out." But Brad wasn't trying to figure anything out. He was trying to establish dominance. Over the next week, he started requiring approval for routine deployments that had always been automated. He instituted daily reports that duplicated information already available in our monitoring dashboards. He even suggested we migrate our perfectly functional Docker containers to a different orchestration platform for standardization. The breaking point came during our monthly architecture review. I was presenting our disaster recovery improvements when Brad interrupted. "Hold on, Edwin. I'm not sure everyone needs this level of technical detail." He looked around the room like he was protecting them from my boring expertise. "Can you give us the executive summary?" I'd been presenting to this same group for 2 years. They were technical leads and senior engineers. They needed the details. But Brad was performing, establishing himself as the filter between the technical weeds and business value. I condensed my 30-minute presentation into 5 minutes of high-level bullet points. Afterward, our CTO, David Park, found me in the hallway. "What happened in there? That wasn't like you." "Brad thought it was too technical," I said. David frowned. "For senior engineers? That's odd." That night, I started keeping records. It wasn't a conscious revenge plot or some master plan. It was basic self-preservation. Brad's behavior felt erratic, unpredictable, and I wanted to protect myself. So I started documenting everything. Every email got forwarded to my personal account and saved in a folder marked Work Archive. Every meeting got summarized in my private notes with dates, attendees, and key decisions. Every Slack conversation that felt relevant got screenshotted. I'm naturally methodical. It's why I'm good at DevOps. But this was different. This was insurance. The pattern became clearer once I started tracking it. Brad would make suggestions that contradicted established best practices, then position himself as the reasonable middle ground when I pushed back. He'd ask for detailed reports on topics he should already understand, then criticize the reports as too in the weeds. He'd schedule meetings during critical maintenance windows, then act frustrated when I had to prioritize keeping our systems running. Most damaging was how he handled our biggest client, MedFlow. They were a healthcare company that relied on our platform for patient data management. Their contract was worth $2.3 million annually, and their security requirements were the reason we'd built half our compliance infrastructure. Brad started pushing for optimization changes to the MedFlow integration, simplifications that would save processing time but reduce audit trail completeness. When I explained the regulatory implications, he waved them off. "We can't let perfect be the enemy of good, Edwin. These healthcare companies love to overcomplicate things." I documented that conversation too. By month 3 of Brad's tenure, the tension was affecting the entire team. Our sprint velocity dropped as we spent time in meetings explaining technical decisions that had never been questioned before. Our deployment frequency decreased as Brad's approval process created bottlenecks. Team morale plummeted as experienced engineers found themselves defending basic practices. Brad seemed to thrive on this chaos. He positioned himself as the calm leader bringing order to our cowboy culture. Never mind that our cowboy culture had maintained 99.97% uptime for 18 months running. The real test came during our quarterly security audit. Brad decided to attend the meeting with our compliance officer, Lisa Wong, even though he'd never participated before. "I want to make sure we're presenting a unified front," he told me the day before. "Let me handle the high-level discussion. You can jump in for technical specifics if needed." I should have pushed back harder. Lisa and I had worked together on every audit for 3 years. She knew our systems inside and out, and she trusted my explanations. But Brad was my manager now, and I was trying to be professional. The audit was a disaster. Brad spent 15 minutes explaining improvements he was planning, changes that would actually weaken our security posture. When Lisa asked about certificate rotation procedures, he gave a vague answer about automated tooling that made no sense. When she asked about our penetration testing schedule, he looked at me to bail him out. "Edwin, you handle the technical implementation details, right?" I salvaged what I could, but the damage was done. Lisa left the meeting looking confused and concerned. She pulled me aside afterward. "Is everything okay with your team? Brad seems unfamiliar with your current security model." "He's still ramping up," I said, hating how diplomatic I sounded. "Ramping up? Edwin, he's the director of IT operations. This is basic stuff." I nodded and said nothing, but I filed away every word of that conversation. October brought our biggest product launch of the year, CloudSync 3.0 with real-time collaboration features. We'd been preparing for months, load testing our servers, optimizing database queries, and coordinating with our CDN provider. Launch day was set for October 15th, with a coordinated marketing campaign and demos scheduled for 3 major industry conferences. 2 weeks before launch, Brad dropped a bombshell. "We need to migrate the collaboration service to the new Kubernetes cluster," he announced in our Monday planning meeting. The room went silent. Our new Kubernetes cluster was still in testing. We'd been gradually moving non-critical services to it, but the collaboration service was the heart of CloudSync 3.0. It handled real-time document synchronization for thousands of concurrent users. "Brad," I said carefully, "that service is stable on the current infrastructure. Moving it 2 weeks before launch introduces unnecessary risk." "The current infrastructure is legacy," he replied. "We need to modernize. This launch is the perfect opportunity." "Legacy? We built that cluster 8 months ago. It's running the latest version of everything." Brad's jaw tightened. "Edwin, I appreciate your caution, but we need to think strategically. The new cluster has better resource allocation." I pulled up our monitoring dashboards. Resource allocation is fine. CPU usage peaks at 60% during stress tests. Memory utilization is stable. Network latency averages 12 milliseconds. Those are point-in-time metrics. We need to think about scalability. The current cluster can handle 300% of our projected load. I have the benchmark data. Brad stood up, his voice taking on that authoritative tone he used when he wanted to end discussions. "This is a business decision, not a technical one. We're moving forward with the migration." I looked around the room. Jake was staring at his laptop screen. Our other teammates were studiously avoiding eye contact. Nobody wanted to get caught in the crossfire. "When do you want to schedule the migration?" I asked. "This weekend." We'll have a full week to troubleshoot before launch. A full week to troubleshoot a completely unnecessary migration of our most critical service. I documented everything and started preparing for disaster. The migration was scheduled for Saturday morning at 6 a.m. during our lowest traffic period. I arrived at the office early, coffee in hand, and a detailed rollback plan in my back pocket. Brad showed up at 6:15 with his own coffee and an air of confident authority. "Ready to make some magic happen?" he said, settling into the chair next to my workstation. The first 2 hours went smoothly. We moved the database replicas, updated the load balancer configurations, and started the gradual traffic shift to the new cluster. By 8:30, we were running 25% of collaboration traffic on the new infrastructure with no issues. Then Brad got impatient. "This is taking forever. Can't we just flip the switch and move everything at once?" "We're following the migration plan," I explained. "Gradual traffic shifting lets us catch problems before they affect all users. But everything's working fine. We're just wasting time." I pulled up the monitoring dashboard. We're seeing slightly higher CPU usage on the new cluster. Nothing critical, but I want to watch it for another hour before we increase the load. Brad leaned back in his chair, clearly frustrated. "Edwin, you're being paranoid. The numbers look fine to me." "The numbers are fine now, but we've only moved 25% of the traffic. When we hit 100%, that CPU usage will quadruple." "Not necessarily. The new cluster has better optimization." I wanted to ask him what specific optimizations he was referring to, but I learned not to challenge his technical assertions in front of other people. Instead, I continued with the planned gradual migration. By noon, we were running 75% of traffic on the new cluster. The CPU metrics were starting to concern me. We were hitting 85% utilization during peak loads. On the old cluster, those same loads never exceeded 60%. "Brad, I think we should pause here and investigate the performance difference." He was reading something on his phone, barely paying attention. "Just finish the migration. We're almost done. If we move the remaining 25% of traffic, we might hit CPU limits during tomorrow's load. Then we'll scale up if we need to." Scaling up requires budget approval from finance. That could take days. Brad finally looked up from his phone. "Edwin, you're overthinking this. Just complete the migration." Against my better judgment, I moved the remaining traffic to the new cluster. The CPU usage immediately spiked to 92%. I documented the metrics and sent Brad a summary email with performance comparisons between the old and new clusters. His response came an hour later. "Looks good. Thanks for your work today." I stared at that email for a long time, wondering if he'd actually read the attachment showing we were running dangerously close to resource limits. The week leading up to launch was tense. Our monitoring alerts were firing more frequently as the collaboration service struggled with the higher CPU overhead on the new cluster. I submitted 3 separate requests to scale up our infrastructure, but Brad kept rejecting them as premature optimization. "Let's see how it performs under real launch load before we start throwing money at it," he said. Real launch load. As if our stress testing hadn't been based on actual usage projections. By Thursday, I was running on caffeine and stubbornness. I'd stayed late every night, fine-tuning configurations and trying to squeeze better performance out of the new cluster. I'd managed to bring CPU utilization down to 88% during peak loads. Better, but still dangerously high. During our final launch readiness meeting, I presented the infrastructure status. "We're seeing higher than expected resource utilization on the collaboration service," I reported. "I recommend adding 2 additional nodes to the cluster before launch." Serena, our CEO, looked concerned. "How much higher?" "About 40% more CPU usage compared to our previous infrastructure." Brad jumped in before I could explain the migration decision. "That's within acceptable parameters. Edwin tends to be conservative with resource planning." Serena nodded, trusting Brad's assessment. "Okay, but let's have the scaling option ready just in case." "Already prepared," I said. "I can add nodes in about 15 minutes if we need them." After the meeting, Brad cornered me in the hallway. "You need to stop undermining me in meetings." "I wasn't undermining you. I was reporting the infrastructure status. You're creating doubt about a successful migration. That doesn't help anyone." I studied his face, looking for any sign that he understood the risk we were taking. "Brad, if the collaboration service crashes during launch, it won't matter who was right about the migration. Our reputation will be damaged. It's not going to crash. You're being paranoid. I'm being careful. There's a difference. He walked away without responding, leaving me alone in the hallway with the weight of the decision I hadn't been allowed to make. #8. Launch day disaster. October 15th started beautifully. Clear skies, perfect Austin weather, and a buzz of excitement throughout the office. Serena had arranged for catered breakfast and a launch day viewing party in the main conference room. The marketing team was tracking social media mentions, the sales team was fielding calls from interested prospects, and the executive team was preparing for their first round of demo calls. I was in the server room, watching metrics and praying. At 8 a.m. Pacific, we flipped the switch. CloudSync 3.0 went live to our user base of 50,000 active accounts. Initial load was light. Early adopters exploring the new features, testing the real-time collaboration tools. By 9 a.m., word was spreading. User signups were 300% higher than normal. Existing users were diving into the collaboration features, creating shared documents, and inviting colleagues to work together in real time. By 10 a.m., we had a problem. CPU utilization on the collaboration service hit 95%. Response time started degrading. Users were reporting lag when editing documents, delays in seeing their colleagues' changes, intermittent connection drops. I called Brad immediately. "We need to add those cluster nodes now," I said without preamble. "How bad is it?" "Bad. We're at 95% CPU and climbing. Users are starting to complain. Can you optimize the service instead of throwing hardware at it?" I wanted to scream. "Brad, this is exactly what I predicted. The new cluster can't handle the load. I need authorization to scale up immediately. Let me check with Serena first. We don't have time for committee decisions. I can add the nodes in 15 minutes, but every minute we wait makes the problem worse. I'll call you back." He hung up, leaving me watching our infrastructure crumble in real time. By 10:30, we were in full crisis mode. User complaints were flooding our support channels. The sales team was fielding angry calls from prospects who couldn't complete their demo sessions. The marketing team was watching our social media mentions turn from excitement to frustration. Brad finally called back at 10:45. "Add the nodes," he said tersely. "Finally, I'll have them online in 20 minutes. But 20 minutes was too late. By 11 a.m., the collaboration service had completely crashed. Users were locked out of their shared documents, losing work and confidence in our platform. Serena was fielding calls from angry enterprise customers threatening to cancel their contracts. I worked frantically to bring the service back online. The additional cluster nodes helped, but the damage was done. We'd gone from a triumphant product launch to a public relations nightmare in the span of 3 hours. The post-mortem meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., but the finger-pointing started immediately. Brad called me into his office at noon, closing the door with a sharp click. "What the hell happened out there?" I kept my voice steady. "The collaboration service couldn't handle the load on the new cluster. Exactly what I warned about all week. You said you could handle the launch load. I said I could handle it on the old infrastructure or with additional nodes on the new cluster. You rejected both options." Brad leaned forward, his face flushed. "Don't try to blame this on me. You're the one who built the service. You're the one responsible for performance. I'm responsible for building systems that work within their specified parameters. The new cluster has different performance characteristics that weren't accounted for in the original design. Then you should have redesigned the service for the new environment." I stared at him. "In 1 week? Brad, that would have taken months of development and testing. That's why I recommended staying on the proven infrastructure for launch." "That's not what I heard. You said the migration would be fine." My blood ran cold. That was a complete fabrication. I'd opposed the migration from the beginning, documented my concerns, and begged for additional resources. But in this room, with no witnesses, Brad was rewriting history. "That's not accurate," I said carefully. "We'll see what Serena thinks." The formal postmortem was worse. Brad presented his version of events, a story where I'd assured him the migration would work, where I'd dismissed his concerns about performance testing, where I'd stubbornly refused to consider scaling options until it was too late. I had documentation for every claim he made, but I couldn't contradict my manager in front of the entire executive team without looking insubordinate. So I sat there, taking notes and watching my reputation get shredded by a man who'd caused the very problem he was now blaming me for. Serena's disappointment was palpable. Edwin, I'm surprised. This isn't like you. I'd like to schedule a separate conversation to walk through the technical timeline, I said diplomatically. Of course, but right now, we need to focus on customer retention and public messaging. The meeting ended with action items, improved monitoring, better performance testing, clearer escalation procedures. All good ideas that wouldn't change what had already happened. As people filed out, Brad lingered by my chair. Hope you learned something today, he said quietly. I learned something, all right. I learned that all my careful documentation was about to become very important. That night, I went home and organized everything. For months of emails, meeting notes, Slack conversations, performance metrics, and incident reports, I laid it all out chronologically, building a timeline that told a very different story than the one Brad had presented. The evidence was overwhelming. Email threads showing Brad pushing for the migration despite my objections. Meeting notes documenting my requests for additional resources. Slack messages where I'd warned about performance implications. Monitoring data proving the new cluster's inferior performance characteristics. Most damning was a series of emails from the week before launch. I'd sent Brad detailed performance projections showing exactly how the system would fail under launch load. His responses were dismissive, sometimes just a single line. Noted, or let's discuss. I printed everything and organized it into folders. Technical timeline, email correspondence, performance data, meeting records. I made 3 copies and stored them in different locations. Then I started planning my defense. Serena called me into her office the next morning. She looked tired, probably from fielding angry customer calls and investor questions about our failed launch. Edwin, I want to understand what happened yesterday. Walk me through your perspective. I pulled out my prepared timeline. A clean, factual summary of the migration decision, my technical concerns, and the resource requests that had been denied. I spoke calmly, letting the documentation speak for itself. Serena's expression grew more serious as I progressed through the evidence. When I showed her the email where Brad had dismissed my performance projections as pessimistic, she stopped me. Brad told me you supported the migration decision. That's not accurate. I opposed it from the beginning, but eventually complied with direct orders from my manager. She flipped through the printed emails, her jaw tightening. This is concerning. I have more documentation if you need it. Send me everything. I want to review this thoroughly before we proceed. I spent an hour that afternoon packaging up 4 months of evidence. Every email, every meeting note, every technical analysis that showed Brad's pattern of ignoring expert advice and rewriting history to cover his mistakes. 2 days later, Serena called both of us into a conference room with Lisa from HR. I've reviewed the documentation Edwin provided, Serena began. There are significant discrepancies between your account, Brad, and the email record. Brad shifted in his chair. Emails don't tell the whole story. There were verbal conversations, context that doesn't come through in writing. Then help me understand the context. Edwin sent you a detailed analysis showing the collaboration service would fail under launch load. Your response was, let's discuss. Did that discussion happen? We talked about it briefly. What was the outcome of that discussion? Brad hesitated. We agreed to monitor the situation closely. I kept quiet, letting him dig his own hole. Serena pulled up another email. Edwin requested additional cluster nodes 3 times in the week before launch. You denied all 3 requests. Can you explain your reasoning? We were trying to avoid unnecessary costs. I believe the existing infrastructure was sufficient. Based on what technical analysis? Silence. Brad had never done any technical analysis. He'd made resource decisions based on assumptions and budget concerns, ignoring the expert advice of the person he'd hired to manage infrastructure. Lisa took notes throughout the conversation, her expression neutral but attentive. When we finished, she asked Brad to step out while she spoke with me privately. Edwin, do you feel comfortable continuing to work under Brad's management? I chose my words carefully. I'm committed to doing my job well, but I need to be able to raise technical concerns without fear of retaliation. Has there been retaliation? I believe yesterday's postmortem was an attempt to shift blame for a decision I opposed. That concerns me going forward. She nodded and made another note. We'll be conducting a more thorough review. Please continue documenting any interactions you feel are relevant. Word travels fast in a startup. By the end of the week, people knew something was happening. Brad was noticeably tense, snapping at team members over minor issues. Serena was having closed-door meetings with various department heads. HR was asking discreet questions about team dynamics and decision-making processes. The tide started turning when David, our CTO, pulled me aside. Serena shared some of your documentation with me. I had no idea Brad was overriding your technical recommendations. I tried to work within the chain of command. Edwin, when it comes to infrastructure decisions that could affect our platform stability, you report to me, not to Brad. That's always been the structure. This was news to me. Brad had been positioning himself as my direct manager for months, requiring approval for decisions I'd previously made independently. Brad said all DevOps decisions needed to go through him. David's expression darkened. That's not accurate. Operations management and technical architecture are separate domains. Brad handles process and resource allocation. You handle technical implementation and system design. Should I have been escalating technical disagreements to you? Absolutely. Especially something as significant as migrating critical services right before a major launch. I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. For months, I'd been trying to work within what I thought was the correct reporting structure. But Brad had been consolidating power that wasn't his to take, using his title to override technical decisions he wasn't qualified to make. David's support changed everything. Suddenly, I wasn't the difficult employee who questioned management decisions. I was the technical expert whose warnings had been ignored by someone outside his area of expertise. The formal investigation took 2 weeks. HR interviewed everyone on the DevOps team, reviewed email communications, and analyzed the timeline of decisions leading up to the launch failure. They brought in an outside consultant to assess our infrastructure management practices and organizational structure. The consultant's report was damning for Brad. It found that he'd created confusion about reporting relationships, made technical decisions without adequate expertise, and failed to follow established escalation procedures for disagreements between operations and engineering teams. Most embarrassing was their analysis of the migration decision. They calculated that staying on the proven infrastructure would have saved $40,000 in emergency scaling costs, prevented customer churn estimated at $200,000 in lost revenue, and avoided the reputational damage that was still affecting our sales pipeline. The technical postmortem was even worse for Brad. When forced to explain his reasoning for the migration timing, he admitted he'd never actually reviewed the performance testing data. He'd made the decision based on general principles about infrastructure modernization, not specific technical requirements. During his interview with HR, Brad tried to claim that I'd been insubordinate and difficult to manage. But every example he provided was contradicted by email evidence showing professional, detailed technical explanations for my positions. The breaking point came when HR asked him to explain his statement that I'd supported the migration. When presented with the email thread showing my repeated objections, he claimed the emails were taken out of context. What context would make "this migration introduces unnecessary risk" sound like support? The HR investigator asked. Brad's response, according to Lisa, was 20 seconds of uncomfortable silence followed by accusations that I'd been undermining him from day one. The decision came down on a Friday afternoon. Serena called an all-hands meeting, something she rarely did outside of major announcements. The entire company gathered in the main conference room, buzzing with speculation. I want to address the organizational changes we're making in response to our CloudSync 3.0 launch experience, Serena began. After a thorough review, we've identified structural issues in our operations management that contributed to the challenges we faced. She paused, looking around the room. Effective immediately, Brad Williams is no longer with the company. We're restructuring the IT operations role to better align with our technical needs and reporting relationships. A murmur rippled through the room. Brad hadn't been seen in the office for 3 days, but this was the first official confirmation of his departure. Edwin Reece will be stepping into the role of Infrastructure Director, reporting directly to our CTO. This reflects the reality of how these decisions should flow and ensures our technical expertise is properly integrated into our operational planning. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but inside I was celebrating. Not just because Brad was gone, but because the investigation had validated everything I'd been trying to communicate for months. After the meeting, Serena pulled me aside. I owe you an apology. I should have recognized the communication breakdown sooner. Thank you for taking the investigation seriously. Your documentation made the decision easy. Without that paper trail, this could have gone very differently. That evening, I sat in my apartment looking out at the Austin skyline, processing everything that had happened. For months ago, I'd started documenting interactions with Brad as simple self-preservation. I had no idea it would lead to a complete organizational restructuring and my promotion to a director role. The irony wasn't lost on me. Brad had tried to sideline me, to position himself as the real decision-maker while relegating me to technical implementation. In the end, his attempts to marginalize my expertise had created a perfect record of his own incompetence. Over the next few weeks, the full scope of Brad's impact became clear. The DevOps team started talking more openly about their experiences over the past 4 months. Stories emerged of technical decisions being overruled, security protocols being questioned, and team morale steadily deteriorating under his management. Jake confided that he'd been updating his resume, planning to leave if things didn't improve. 2 other team members admitted they'd been approached by recruiters and had seriously considered jumping ship. It wasn't just the technical stuff, explained Maria, our database administrator. It was the way he made us feel stupid for caring about things like monitoring and documentation, like we were just being difficult. The customer impact was still reverberating. We'd lost 3 enterprise accounts directly due to the launch failure, representing about $400,000 in annual recurring revenue. Our net promoter score had dropped significantly, and the sales team was working overtime to rebuild confidence with prospects. But there were silver linings. The organizational restructuring had clarified reporting relationships across the entire engineering team. David, our CTO, had implemented new processes for technical decision-making that ensured operational and architectural concerns were properly balanced. Most importantly, we'd learned valuable lessons about leadership and accountability. Serena admitted she'd been too hands-off with Brad's management style, trusting his enterprise experience without validating his technical competence. I hired him to bring operational discipline, she told me during one of our weekly check-ins. But I didn't realize he was imposing process without understanding the underlying technical requirements. My first month as infrastructure director was focused on damage control and rebuilding. We needed to restore customer confidence, improve our platform reliability, and rebuild team morale that had been damaged during Brad's tenure. The first priority was fixing the performance issues that had caused the launch failure. We migrated the collaboration service back to the proven infrastructure, implemented proper load balancing, and added the monitoring capabilities I'd originally recommended. More importantly, we established new protocols for major infrastructure changes. Any migration or architectural modification would now require sign-off from both operations, my role, and engineering leadership. No more unilateral decisions from people who didn't understand the technical implications. The team responded enthusiastically to these changes. Jake started volunteering for extra projects again. Maria began proposing innovative database optimization strategies. The energy and creativity that had been suppressed under Brad's management came flooding back. We also implemented what I called documentation-driven development, a practice of creating written records for all significant technical decisions. This wasn't bureaucracy for its own sake, but a way to ensure that context, reasoning, and alternatives were preserved for future reference. The irony was delicious. The documentation habit that had saved my career during Brad's investigation became a core practice for preventing similar problems in the 3 months after Brad's departure. We launched a customer recovery campaign called Cloud Sync Rebuilt. The messaging was honest about what had gone wrong and specific about the improvements we'd made. We know we let you down during our Cloud Sync 3.0 launch. The campaign began. Here's exactly what we've done to ensure it never happens again. The campaign included detailed technical explanations of our infrastructure improvements, testimonials from team members about our renewed focus on reliability, and specific metrics showing improved performance across all our services. Most powerful was a video testimonial I recorded, explaining the technical changes from an engineer's perspective. I talked about the importance of proper testing, gradual rollouts, and listening to technical expertise. I didn't mention Brad by name, but anyone familiar with our situation could read between the lines. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Customers appreciated the transparency and technical depth. Several prospects who'd been scared away by the launch failure came back to reevaluate our platform. Our Net Promoter Score began recovering, climbing back toward pre-launch levels. One customer email particularly stood out. "It's refreshing to see a company admit mistakes and show specific technical improvements rather than just marketing promises. This is how you rebuild trust." 6 months after taking over as infrastructure director, I was invited to speak at Cloud.CNF Austin about crisis management and infrastructure resilience. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was being recognized for expertise in managing the very crisis that Brad's decisions had created. My presentation focused on the importance of documentation, clear decision-making processes, and maintaining technical expertise in operational roles. I talked about the CloudSync 3.0 incident as a case study in what happens when operational and technical concerns aren't properly balanced. The audience was engaged, asking detailed questions about our recovery process and the organizational changes we'd implemented. Several attendees approached me afterward to share similar experiences at their companies. "You're describing our exact situation," said one startup CTO. "We have an operations manager who keeps making technical decisions without understanding the implications. How did you convince leadership to address it?" "Documentation," I replied. "You need a clear record of technical recommendations being overruled and the consequences of those decisions. Without that paper trail, it becomes a he said, she said situation." The presentation was recorded and uploaded to YouTube, where it quickly gained traction in the DevOps community. Comments poured in from engineers sharing their own stories of technical expertise being marginalized by non-technical management. About 8 months after Brad's departure, I received an unexpected call from a recruiter. "I'm working with a client who's considering Brad Williams for a senior infrastructure role. His resume lists CloudSync as a reference. Would you be willing to provide feedback on his performance?" I paused, considering my options. I could give a diplomatically neutral reference, focusing on the positive aspects of Brad's tenure. Or I could be honest about what had actually happened. "I'd be happy to discuss Brad's time at CloudSync," I said finally. "But I should mention that I have significant concerns about his technical decision-making and leadership approach." The recruiter's tone sharpened with interest. "Can you be more specific?" I walked through the key incidents: the unnecessary migration, the ignored technical warnings, the launch failure, and the attempt to shift blame. I stuck to facts, avoiding personal opinions or emotional language. "That's concerning," the recruiter said. "His resume presents a very different picture of his time at your company." "I'm sure it does. I'd recommend checking with other references and doing thorough technical interviews if you're considering him for an infrastructure role." 2 weeks later, the recruiter called back. "We decided not to move forward with Brad. Your feedback, combined with some gaps we found in his technical knowledge during interviews, raised too many red flags." I felt a complex mix of satisfaction and sympathy. Brad had clearly learned nothing from his experience at CloudSync, still presenting himself as qualified for roles that required expertise he didn't possess. But his inability to find similar positions suggested that word was getting around in the Austin tech community. A year after the CloudSync 3.0 incident, I was asked to present lessons learned to our board of directors. It was an opportunity to reflect on everything that had happened and extract actionable insights for the future. My presentation covered 5 key areas. First, the importance of technical expertise in operational roles. Operations management isn't just about process and resource allocation, I explained. It requires deep understanding of the systems being managed. You can't make good operational decisions without technical competence. Second, the danger of consolidating decision-making authority without corresponding accountability. Brad had the authority to override technical recommendations, but wasn't held accountable for the consequences of those decisions. This created a moral hazard where he could make risky choices without bearing the cost of failure. Third, the value of documentation in organizational decision-making. Written records create accountability and preserve context. Without documentation, it's easy for decisions to be misremembered or misrepresented after the fact. Fourth, the need for clear escalation paths when operational and technical teams disagree. There needs to be a defined process for resolving conflicts between different areas of expertise. Otherwise, decisions get made based on authority rather than merit. Finally, The importance of leadership, humility, and willingness to admit mistakes. The fastest way to lose team trust is to blame others for problems you created. Good leaders take responsibility and focus on solutions rather than scapegoats. The board asked thoughtful questions about each point, particularly around organizational structure and accountability mechanisms. Several members commented that they'd seen similar dynamics at other companies they'd worked with. With Brad gone and new processes in place, our team culture transformed dramatically. The fear and tension that had characterized his tenure was replaced by collaboration, innovation, and mutual respect. We implemented monthly failure parties, where team members could share mistakes they'd made and lessons they'd learned without fear of retribution. This created psychological safety that encouraged experimentation and honest communication about technical challenges. Jake proposed a major overhaul of our monitoring system that required significant development time but would prevent entire classes of performance issues. Under Brad's management, such proposals had been dismissed as gold plating. Now, we could evaluate them on their technical merits. Maria developed a new database optimization strategy that improved query performance by 40% across our entire platform. She'd had the idea for months, but had been afraid to propose it because Brad had criticized previous optimization suggestions as premature. The transformation wasn't just about technical improvements. Team members started collaborating more effectively, sharing knowledge freely, and taking initiative on projects that improved our overall infrastructure resilience. Most gratifying was watching team members regain confidence in their expertise. During Brad's tenure, people had started second-guessing their technical judgments, deferring to his operational pronouncements even when they knew better. Now, they were asserting their professional knowledge and pushing back when operational requirements conflicted with technical best practices. The CloudSync story started gaining attention in the broader tech community. My CloudSync presentation was shared widely, and I began receiving invitations to speak at other conferences about organizational dynamics in technical teams. I was particularly invited to address a problem that seemed endemic in the startup world: non-technical managers making technical decisions without adequate expertise. The CloudSync incident had become a cautionary tale about the consequences of marginalizing technical expertise in favor of operational authority. One presentation, titled "When Operations and Engineering Collide," drew over 500 attendees at a major DevOps conference. I walked through the Brad situation as a case study, focusing on the organizational patterns that had enabled the crisis. The Q&A session was intense. Engineer after engineer shared similar stories from their own companies. Operations managers who didn't understand the systems they were managing. Technical decisions being made based on budget concerns rather than technical requirements. Expert recommendations being overruled by people with impressive titles but limited domain knowledge. It's like having a non-pilot making navigation decisions for an airplane, one attendee commented. The pilot knows how to fly, but someone else is choosing the route based on fuel costs without understanding weather patterns or air traffic control requirements. The metaphor was perfect. Technical systems, like aircraft, require specialized knowledge to operate safely. You can't substitute business acumen for technical expertise when making decisions that could crash the plane. 2 years after the CloudSync 3.0 incident, our company had not only recovered but thrived. We'd rebuilt customer trust, improved our platform reliability, and established a reputation for technical excellence and operational transparency. Our uptime had increased to 99.99%, the best in our industry. Our customer satisfaction scores were at all-time highs. We'd won several awards for technical innovation and engineering culture. Most importantly, we'd attracted top talent from across the industry. Engineers wanted to work at CloudSync because they knew their expertise would be valued and their technical recommendations would be taken seriously. Serena, our CEO, reflected on the transformation during our annual planning meeting. Losing Brad was the best thing that happened to our company. It forced us to examine our organizational structure and fix fundamental problems we didn't even know we had. The irony was complete. Brad's attempt to consolidate power and marginalize technical expertise had backfired spectacularly, resulting in his dismissal and the elevation of the very expertise he'd tried to suppress. My role had expanded beyond infrastructure to include broader technical strategy and organizational development. I was working directly with the board on technical roadmap planning and helping other startups avoid the organizational pitfalls we'd experienced. 3 years later, I received another call from a recruiter asking about Brad. This time, it was for a much smaller company offering a significantly lower-level position. He's applying for a senior systems administrator role, the recruiter explained. His resume shows director-level experience, but the salary expectations don't match. We're trying to understand the disconnect. I gave another honest reference, focusing on the technical gaps and decision-making issues I'd observed. By now, I'd refined my feedback to be concise and factual, avoiding any appearance of personal vendetta. "Thank you for the candid assessment," the recruiter said. "This explains why he's having trouble finding positions at his previous level." After hanging up, I reflected on the full arc of the story. Brad had entered CloudSync with impressive credentials and ambitious plans to modernize our operations. His downfall hadn't been malicious intent, but rather a toxic combination of overconfidence, technical ignorance, and unwillingness to listen to expert advice. The documentation that had saved my career and exposed his incompetence had become a core part of our company culture. We now maintain detailed records not for protection, but for institutional learning and continuous improvement. The crisis he'd precipitated had forced us to examine and improve our organizational structure, making us stronger and more resilient than we would have been otherwise. Looking back on the entire experience, I'm struck by how a simple habit, documenting interactions with a difficult manager, had cascaded into organizational transformation and industry recognition. The key lessons are clear. Documentation isn't just about protecting yourself. It's about preserving truth in environments where politics and personality can distort reality. Technical expertise can't be replaced by management authority. Complex systems require specialized knowledge to operate safely and efficiently. Accountability and authority must be aligned. People making decisions need to bear responsibility for the consequences of those decisions. Organizational culture matters more than individual competence. A culture that suppresses expertise and discourages honest communication will fail regardless of how talented individual team members might be. Crisis can be transformative if approached with honesty and humility. Our greatest failure became the catalyst for our greatest improvements. The CloudSync story has become part of my professional identity. I'm known in the Austin tech community as someone who successfully navigated a difficult organizational situation through preparation, documentation, and principled action. But more importantly, I learned that standing up for technical excellence isn't just about personal vindication. It's about protecting the systems and customers that depend on those systems working correctly. Brad Williams taught me that lesson, though not in the way he intended. His attempt to silence my expertise ultimately amplified it, turning a local power struggle into an industry-wide conversation about technical leadership and organizational accountability. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting incompetence expose itself while ensuring the truth is well documented. Brad gave me all the rope he needed to hang himself. I just made sure to keep detailed records of how he used it. The rest, as they say, is history, written in emails, meeting notes, and performance metrics that told an undeniable story of what happens when operations ignore engineering, when authority overrides expertise, and when managers try to silence the very people they should be listening to most carefully. In the end, the truth always wins. You just need to make sure it's properly documented.